All right, American democracy, we are starting out today with Congress. Remember the three branches of government? We have Congress, President, courts. Today we're going to focus on Congress. So our Congress meets in the U.S. Capitol building, and it's bicameral, which means you have two different groups of people or two houses. Remember, a bicycle has two wheels. Bicameral means two groups of people. So the Senate represents the state, so Wisconsin, California, Michigan. The House represents the people within those states. You think back to our, when they wrote the Constitution, you had kind of the small states freaking out because they wanted equal representation because they were small. And so this was like the New Jersey plan, where they wanted it equal. And that's what we have today. So in the Senate today, we have 100 members and 2 per state. So every state has 2. Large state, small state, doesn't matter. The House, remember, this was the large state plan. Like Virginia, being a large state, they wanted everything based on population. So there's 435 members, and it's based on population. So California, being the largest state today, has 53 House members. Wisconsin, we have 8, not too bad. And North Dakota, not many people live in North Dakota, they have 1. So what do you get from being in Congress? Well, you get some perks. You get about $174,000 per year. But most of the time, people who run for Congress don't do it for the money. 200 plus are currently millionaires, and so they do it for the power and the prestige of the position. Your office is paid for, your travel, all of those things. Sometimes senators are considered more important than House members because there's fewer of them. There's only 100, and they serve longer. They have a 6-year term. So once you're elected to the Senate, you're set for 6 years. But in the House, it's only a 2-year term. So you're more worried about re-election more often over here. The House is supposed to be closer to the people. And so if we get a House member that we don't think is doing a good job, we can vote them out after 2 years, where the Senate is kind of be a little more distant from the people. And so we're stuck with them for 6 years. All right, so just understand that Congress, like government in general, has been dominated by older white men throughout time. Historically, they're the ones who've held power, and Congress still has a majority of older white men falls into this category. But understand it is changing over time. So our most recent Congress, a new session of Congress starts every 2 years. So our most recent one, the 117th Congress, just started this past January. It's one of the most diverse Congresses we've ever had in history. And so you have 60 African Americans, 45 Latino members of Congress, and 142 women in Congress, which is the most we've ever had. This does tie into what we talked about earlier on, though. These groups of people, in our first unit, we talked about groups of people tend to vote certain ways. Well, African Americans, we said we're predominantly Democrat, and this backs it up. In the House, 58 African Americans, 56 of them are Democrats. Latinos, there's 45 total in Congress, most of them Democrats. And women, most of them Democrats as well. Not all of them, but again, we're talking about majorities here. So the key is, a term you really want to know is incumbents. People who currently hold office. So if you're currently a House member or a senator, you are considered the incumbent. You're the person in office. And in reality, they get reelected most of the time. This green line here shows the reelection rate of House members. If you average that out, it's about 90%. 90% of the time, they win re-election. In the Senate, it's a little bit less. It's about 80%, which is still pretty high. But they have a huge advantage being currently in Congress. So let's say I wanted to challenge somebody. I've got an 80 or 90% chance of losing because they've got such an advantage. And we'll talk about why that is. So again, going through the House over here. Again, the House is supposed to be kind of closer to the people, so the requirements are a little bit lower. You only have to be 25 years old, which is pretty young. You have to be a 7-year citizen of the United States. Again, you only serve 2 years. There's 435 total, again, based on population. That's the breakdown. Every 10 years, we have what's called reapportionment, where this number of 435 is redistributed across the states. So every 10 years, we do the census, which is when we count the number of people who live in Beloit, who live in Wisconsin, who live in the country. And you may have noticed that this last year in 2020, we did the most recent census. And so if your state's population goes up or down, the number your state has may go up or down. They actually say for the first time, California will probably drop to 52 or 51 because their population is actually decreasing for the first time probably in our country's history. So that's called a reapportionment. Every 10 years, The number, the total doesn't change, but how many your state gets does change. And so currently the House is controlled by the Democratic Party. They have a slight majority, 221 Democrats to 211 Republicans, with 3 vacant seats currently. And this just shows what that looks like. You have all the Democrats sit on one side, all the Republicans sit on the other side. This map just talks about what I was talking about right here. The population goes up or down, your state loses or gains House seats. So all those blue states there, their population is decreasing, and so they're losing House seats. The red states, their population is increasing, so they're gaining House seats. The main thing to understand from this chart is, where is population moving in this country? Well, typically people are leaving the north. They're leaving the Midwest, and they're leaving the Northeast, and then moving south and west. Mainly for weather. Obviously, winters are much better in the south, and taxes. And so you see Florida is getting quite a few, Texas is getting a lot. And so we're going to probably see that trend continue going forward, which gives those southern states more power in the House and electing the president. So Wisconsin has 8 House members. So you have to take Wisconsin, you have to carve it up in 8 chunks or districts, and that's called apportionment. And so here you have the 8 chunks here in Wisconsin. You have one person representing each area, and that's their job, is to represent their one district in Wisconsin, the people in that district. Now, sometimes it's not done nice and neat like this. They do something called gerrymandering, where they purposely draw some crazy-looking lines, because the politicians draw these lines themselves. And so sometimes they draw these crazy-shaped districts to help or hurt their party or the other party. So here's some examples of that. You look at Illinois, you got this crazy purple-shaped district where they're purposely lumping people together who live there. In North Carolina, you've got these blue districts which don't make sense at all. The Chicago area, you have this one district connected by the highway over here. So politicians are purposely drawing these crazy-shaped districts to either help their party or hurt the other party by lumping people together or splitting groups of people up. It's not supposed to happen. So here's a good representation of that. So if you have a state with 50 people, 30 of them are Democrats, 20 of them are Republicans. Perfect representation would look like this. You'd have 3 blue districts, 2 red. Blue would win because they have more people. Makes sense. But you could draw the districts like this. Now you have 5 blue districts. Blue wins, but blue wins by a lot. That's not really fair to anybody red or Republican, because they should have some voice. Now, if somehow the Republicans got control and drew the districts, and they drew these crazy-shaped districts like this, now all of a sudden you have 3 red and 2 blue, red wins, even though they're the minority group of the population, which is not really fair at all either. So that's basically kind of what gerrymandering is today, drawing these crazy-shaped districts to help your party, even though your party might not be in the majority. And so there's rules against that. They're not supposed to draw districts like that, but it still happens. They push the limits. The courts basically ruled that those districts, those crazy-shaped districts, have to have equal population, have to be compact, which means close together, and kind of physically adjoining. You can't have a piece here and a piece over here. So in the House, the Speaker of the House is the most important person in the House. She kind of runs the show, or whoever's in that position. Currently, that's Nancy Pelosi. The Democrats have a majority, so they pick the Speaker, and currently that is Nancy. She is third in line for the presidency. So you have President Biden, you have Vice President Harris, and then you have Nancy Pelosi as third in line. And she basically runs the show in the House. She sets the agenda. She decides what bills will come to the floor to vote on. So not much happens without her running it. That's why she's a very powerful person. All right, now we're going down to the other end of the Capitol. The other end, the Senate, is a little bit tougher, right? The House is closer to the people. The Senate is supposed to be a little bit further, so the qualifications are a little bit tougher. You have to be 30 years old, not 25. You have to be a 9-year citizen, not a 7-year citizen. There's only 100, again, 2 per state. You serve for 6 years. Currently, you have something kind of unusual right now. The Senate is split evenly between Democrats and Republicans. There's 50 Republicans, and there's 48 Democrats plus 2 independents who work with the Democrats. So it's 50-50. And so when there's a tie, the vice president is the tie-breaking vote. She's technically the president of the Senate. That's the vice president's really only job in the Constitution, is to be president of the Senate. But typically they only show up if it's a tie-breaking vote. And so my guess is Kamala Harris is going to be doing quite a few tie-breaking votes because it's a 50-50 tie. So again, there's 100 senators, you have all the Democrats, all the Republicans, and those 2 independents that work with the Democrats. 2 current senators from Wisconsin. You have Tammy Baldwin, a Democrat, and Ron Johnson, a Republican. And so if you look at the states, those blue states, both their senators are Democrats. The red states, both of them are Republicans. In the purple, you have one of each. So again, this kind of reinforces the geography we talked about earlier in the class, how the South tends to be heavily Republican, the West Coast heavily Democrat, the Midwest and Northeast, a mix, but more Democrat than Republican, and the West tends to be more Republican as well. Leadership in the Senate, again, the Vice President is technically the President of the Senate. So Kamala Harris is the President of the Senate. But really, again, it's more of a ceremonial position. She only shows up if there's a tie vote. So when she's gone, you have pro tempore, a temporary president, Patrick Leahy. Because Democrats have the advantage, he's the longest-serving Democrat. He is the pro tempore, or temporary president. But even that is more of a ceremonial position. The real power in the Senate, like the House is Speaker of the House. In the Senate, the main power belongs to the majority leader. So Chuck Schumer from New York, he's currently the majority leader. He really kind of runs the show in the U.S. Senate. All right, so just a few things to wrap it up. Obviously, the main job of Congress is to pass laws. That's their main job, but they do other things as well. And so they each have some very specific powers. So a treaty. So let's say President Biden signs a treaty with a foreign country. The Senate has to approve that. Confirming appointments. The president picks a new Supreme Court justice. The Senate has to approve that. That's probably one of the most powerful things they can do. Money, taxation, because taxes, people care about taxes. They gave that power to the House. Remember, the House is closer to the people. But then regulating trade, coining money, copyrights and patents, declaring war officially is a power of Congress, but we'll talk about with the president what that really means. And finally, just some other powers that don't deal with passing laws. If the Electoral College fails, how we actually elect the president, which we'll talk about later on, the House would pick the president. Now, that has not happened in a long time, but that, in theory, is what would happen if the Electoral College did not work. Congress can propose all new amendments to the Constitution, so if we were going to add a 28th Amendment, it would go through Congress. And impeachment. Impeachment's been in the news a lot, obviously, with President Trump having been impeached twice. The House, they impeach the president, which basically is they charge them with a crime. So there's only been a handful of presidents that have been impeached: Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton, and now Donald Trump twice. It's just a vote. Impeach or not impeach, so charge them with a crime. Now, if they get impeached, then it goes to the Senate, and they hold a trial for a conviction. No president has been convicted by the Senate. Donald Trump impeached twice, but was not convicted either time. And it's tough to convict somebody, and it should be. You need to get 2/3 vote to convict somebody in impeachment. So out of 100 members, you would need 67 members of the Senate to vote against them, which is hard to do when it's so split down the middle between both parties. Again, no president has been impeached and removed from office. All right, that is it. That is Congress. Hope you enjoyed. We'll talk about the presidency next.